There's a kind of silence that doesn't just quiet the room. It quiets your whole existence. It settles into your bones when the world forgets you exist, when no one's listening, when warmth is a privilege, not a promise. You learn early that no one is coming. No cavalry, no gentle rescue. Just snow falling outside a crooked window and the echo of your own breath in the dark. That's where she was made, not in the spotlight, not in applause, but in the cold. In a wooden cabin in Alaska where the nights were long, the water didn't run, and comfort was a stranger. You think that would break a child. Sometimes it almost does, but sometimes it does something else. It forges them, because when you grow up surrounded by that kind of emptiness, you learn how to find something no one can steal. The fire inside, not the loud kind, not the kind that burns down houses. The quiet kind. The kind that keeps a soul warm through winters no one else can see. She learned how to sing, not to perform, but to survive. Her voice wasn't trained, it was unearthed, pulled out of silence like a thread from the dark. And in that voice, there was something the world had forgotten. Truth. Unpolished, unapologetic, undeniable. But this isn't just about her. It's about you, because maybe you've lived through a silence too. Maybe not in a frozen cabin, but in a home where no one asked how you were doing. In a school where you blended in so well you disappeared. In a world where your pain was invisible. And your strength had to be built in secret. You've been alone with your thoughts. You've felt the weight of being unseen. And you've wondered if all that silence meant you weren't enough. But it didn't mean that. Not even close. It meant you were being prepared. Prepared to hear yourself in a way most people never will. Prepared to build a foundation that doesn't shake when the applause fades or the money runs dry. Prepared to speak with a voice that isn't borrowed, but born. That silence you survived? It wasn't a void. It was a womb. It didn't bury you. It built you. And one day, maybe even today, you'll understand that you didn't come from nothing. You came from everything this noisy world has forgotten how to feel. Stillness, truth, fire without flame. And that's where resilience is born. Not from what you gain, but from what you survive, and who you become in the silence. There are moments in life when something breaks, not outside of you, but within. You walk around carrying a silence so loud it deafens every room you enter. You smile, you nod, you play your part. But inside there's a noise, a storm of memories you never asked for. For Jewel, that storm came early. A childhood shaped by fractured relationships, emotional volatility, and moments that stole her innocence before she knew what to call it. But instead of running from the chaos, she listened. She sat with it. And that changed everything. You see, most people spend their lives running from pain. They bury it beneath achievements, distractions, addictions, anything to avoid hearing the echo of their own heartbreak. But what if the pain wasn't the enemy? What if it was the map? The quiet, trembling voice trying to tell you where you lost yourself. And where to begin looking again? Jewel learned this the hard way. She watched the people she loved disintegrate in front of her, not from illness or accidents, but from the wounds they never faced. That realization? It either breaks you or builds something new inside you. She chose to build. She began asking deeper questions. Why do I feel unworthy? Why do I seek approval from those who keep wounding me? Why do I betray myself just to be accepted? In the answering, she found pieces of herself that had been buried under years of silence and survival. When the world teaches you to avoid pain, healing becomes an act of rebellion. and Jewel rebelled in the quietest, most powerful way, by telling the truth. Not to the world at first, but to herself. In notebooks, in songs, in solitude. She found that the wound she carried wasn't just a scar. It was a doorway. It pointed her toward what mattered. What hurt the most also held the most meaning. It's not about glorifying pain. It's about realizing that pain holds intelligence. It knows exactly where you're broken. It knows where the lie began, the one that told you you're not enough, not lovable, not seen. Jewel didn't silence her pain. She translated it into words, into rhythm, into music that reached millions because it was born in a place so few people dare to go. If you've been running from your own wound, hear this. What you're avoiding might be the very thing that leads you home, not back to who you were, but forward to who you're meant to become. The pain isn't the end. It's the beginning of a deeper honesty, a more fearless version of you, because once you learn to face the storm inside you, no storm outside of you can ever control you again. There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe. It stings. The kind that settles in after too many years of being misunderstood, unseen, unloved in the way you needed. And sometimes the only way to find yourself is to walk away from everything you've ever known, not with a plan, not with applause, just a pulse in your chest and a whisper in your soul that says, go. At 16, Jewel didn't just leave Alaska. She left behind the noise, not city noise, emotional noise. The chaos that comes from living around people who can't see past their own pain, who hand you their wounds like inheritance. She packed what little she had, climbed into a beat-up van, and drove into uncertainty with nothing but a voice, a notebook, and a fragile kind of faith that most would mistake for foolishness. You see, the world has its own definitions of success and failure. It praises titles, applause, comfort. It fears the unknown. So when someone chooses to walk away from safety, from even the idea of belonging, it looks like failure. But what the world calls failure is often the furnace where something rare is forged. Clarity. Living out of that van wasn't romantic. It wasn't some wild, rebellious adventure. It was cold. It was lonely. It was terrifying. She didn't have a tour booked. She didn't have a record deal. She had nothing but a dream and a decision to protect it, no matter how ridiculous it looked. That's the part they don't show you in stories. The nights when you doubt every choice. The mornings you wake up with frost on your windows and questions in your soul. That's where she learned. Vision doesn't come with validation. Not at first. Because real freedom doesn't feel like soaring at the beginning. It feels like falling. Like loss. Like being invisible to the world while your soul starts to wake up. It strips away the noise, the opinions, the expectations, the fear. And when the noise is gone, the only voice left is your own. That's what Jewel found in the fun. Not comfort, not certainty, but herself. She sang to empty rooms. She wrote with no guarantee anyone would ever read a word. And in doing so, she became someone the world couldn't ignore. Not because she chased success, but because she chased truth. When you leave behind what doesn't honor you, you lose the crowd. But you find your compass. And once you find that, no amount of noise can drown it out again. So if you're standing on the edge, scared, unsure, alone, know this. Sometimes the first step into purpose feels like exile. Sometimes freedom looks like failure, until it doesn't. It's a strange thing, isn't it, to finally arrive where you were once only allowed to dream. To step onto the stage, hear your name echo across stadiums, see your face lit up in the glow of magazine covers, and feel hollow. Not because you're ungrateful, not because you're blind to the privilege of it, but because somewhere deep, in your chest, this wasn't the thing that was supposed to save you. When Jewel's first album shattered expectations and sold over 12 million copies, the world did what it always does. It crowned her. She made it, they said. She's living the dream. And on the surface, they were right. She had money, attention, the validation people chase their entire lives. But no one asked the more dangerous question. Was she still whole? Because the truth is, success doesn't mend the parts of you you've abandoned. It magnifies them. Whatever ghosts you carried before the spotlight, they don't disappear under fame. They multiply. You're suddenly surrounded by people who don't see you. They see what they want from you. The applause doesn't hug you at night. The record sales don't soothe your nervous system. And no chart position can undo the ache of never having felt safe. Jewel learned, the hard way, that achieving the dream isn't the same as being healed enough to live inside it. Her trauma didn't evaporate with the hit songs. Her insecurities didn't vanish with the record deals. The emotional fractures from her childhood still whispered in the quiet. And maybe the most brutal realization of all? You can be seen by millions and still feel completely alone. That's why this chapter matters. Because we've been sold a lie, that the finish line is outside of us. That fame, success, wealth, those are the rewards. But they're not. They're mirrors. And if you step into them unprepared, unhealed, or disconnected from who you really are, they don't reflect your power. They reflect your pain. So what do you do then? When the world says you made it, but your soul still feels unmade, you slow down. You look inward. You get honest. You stop chasing more and start unpacking the weight you've already carried. That's what Jewel did. She turned down paths most would sprint toward. She chose solitude over spectacle, therapy over attention, art over fame. Not because she didn't want success, but because she wanted to survive it. You see, the real prize was never the stage. It was the courage to still be herself when the lights went up. The ability to hold on to the quiet truth inside, even when the world shouted 100 different narratives about who she was supposed to be. Fame is loud. But wholeness is quiet. It's private. It doesn't clap for you. It just holds you. Steady, grounded, real. And maybe that's what we're really searching for. Not to be seen, but to be okay when we are. The world will hand you 1,000 voices and call it clarity. Fame only multiplies them. Suddenly everyone thinks they know you, what you should sing, how you should speak, who you should become. They project their fears, their fantasies, their demands onto your skin like you're some kind of canvas. But you were never meant to be a canvas. You were meant to be a flame. When the noise came for Jewel, and it did in waves, she didn't try to outshout it. She didn't bend her voice to match the marketplace. She didn't trade authenticity for applause. She turned inward. And that, in a world addicted to distraction, is the most rebellious act of all. She chose silence, stillness, simplicity. In the middle of music industry chaos, she held on to the quiet practices that once kept her alive in the back of a cold van: journaling, meditation, poetry. Tools not of performance, but preservation. These weren't hobbies. They were lifelines. Because when the world wants you to perform your worth, self-reflection becomes resistance. When everything external wants a piece of you, the only way to survive is to retreat inward and remember, nothing outside of you gets to define you. You see, there's a moment in every life where you have to decide, will you be an echo or will you be a voice? Being an echo is easy. It's safe. It pleases. It aligns with expectations. But being a voice, that takes work. That takes aloneness. That takes losing people who only love the version of you that fit their story. Jewel knew this. She felt it in every contract negotiation, every photo shoot, every time someone tried to remake her in their image. So she stopped asking for permission. She stopped waiting for the world to get quiet. Instead, she got quiet within herself. And that became her compass. Because the real work of self-reliance isn't about detaching from the world, it's about remaining whole inside it. That's the lesson here. Not how to escape the noise. You won't. It's everywhere. The trick is learning how to hear yourself over it, how to root yourself in stillness so deeply that when the winds of opinion come, you bend, but you don't break. You listen, but you don't lose yourself. Self-reliance isn't isolation. It's intimacy. With your truth, your voice, your values, it's knowing that who you are when no one is watching. That version of you deserves your loyalty more than any audience ever will. Jewel didn't just survive fame, she stayed sovereign inside of it, and in doing so she left a map, not to success, but to self. A map that leads inward, to a quiet room, a flickering candle, a voice, trembling at first, then steady, unshaken, real, yours. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't bruise the skin. It bruises your understanding of love, the betrayal of someone who was supposed to protect you, the abandonment of someone who should have stayed. It lingers, not like a storm that passes, but like a fog that creeps into your lungs and changes the way you breathe. Jewel lived with that fog. Her mother, the one who should have nurtured her, disappeared behind a curtain of manipulation and absence. And for years that wound dictated the way she moved through the world. Careful, guarded, half-trusting, half-waiting for the next betrayal. But here's what they don't tell you about forgiveness. It's not a moment. It's not a line you cross once, and then you're free. It's a practice, messy, circular, often silent. It's choosing, again and again, not to let someone else's actions write the rest of your life. Jewel didn't forgive because it was deserved. She forgave because carrying the weight was killing her. And she knew, either she would break the pattern, or the pattern would break her. That's what makes forgiveness revolutionary. It severs the cycle. It says, this pain will not shape my future. It will not pass through me and into the next generation. It ends here, with me. But the hardest part? It wasn't forgiving her mother. It was forgiving herself, for not seeing it sooner, for being complicit in her own depletion, for the quiet rage that lived behind her kindness. That's the kind of self-forgiveness no one applauds. The private reckoning in the middle of the night when you finally admit that survival had a cost, and you're still paying it. And yet there's a grace that follows that honesty. A stillness. Like the moment after a long storm, when everything is broken, but somehow more real. That's what Jewel found. Not a reconciliation story. Not a public reunion. But a personal emancipation. From guilt, from shame, from the invisible chains of unfinished grief. Forgiveness didn't make her a saint. It made her human again. It gave her back her voice, not just the one the world hears in songs, but the quiet one inside that says, I am still here. I am still worthy. I am not what happened to me. That is the revolution, not in speeches, not in confrontation, but in the quiet decision to be free, even when they never said sorry, even when the damage can't be undone, even when the past stays messy. You don't forgive to change the past. You forgive to reclaim the future. And sometimes, the final act of love is learning how to leave someone behind without carrying them with you. You don't realize it at first, the slow, quiet way the world teaches you to disappear, to shrink your edges, polish your truth, silence your ache, especially if you're a woman, especially if you want to be seen and still be real. The industry sells a promise. If you play the part, if you fit the mold, you'll be loved. But what they're really selling is a cage, gilded, praised, admired, but a cage all the same. Jewel didn't fit, and she didn't try to. She sang with teeth that weren't straight and a voice that cracked open grief like a confession. She wore her pain like a second skin, not for performance, but because it was real. And that's what made it radical. In a world obsessed with perfection, she chose honesty. In a culture of branding, she chose soul. They told her to fix her smile. She kept it crooked. They told her to write what sells. She wrote what bled. Because somewhere deep down, she knew that femininity was never about beauty or approval. It was about presence. Owning your voice, sitting inside your body, even when it's aching, even when it's different, even when it's been told it's not enough. And maybe that's the most dangerous thing you can do in a world built on illusion. Refuse to be consumed. Jewel didn't arrive on red carpets wearing armor. She arrived barefoot, singing about fathers who leave and lovers who lie and nights that stretch too long. And in doing so, she gave other women permission to speak, to break, to stop pretending. Because the real power isn't in becoming untouchable. It's in becoming undeniable, whole, seen, as you are. Perfection is a performance that never ends. But humanity, that's where the music lives, in the cracks, in the mess, in the unedited truth. So when you find yourself molding to fit what they want, pause. Ask yourself, is this mine? This smile? This silence? This script? Or was it handed to me the moment I stepped into the world? Because the moment you remember who you were before they told you who to be, that's when you begin. That's when you reclaim something sacred. Your femininity, your fire, your freedom. And you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to stop apologizing for being real. There are places inside you that don't have language. Only weight. Rooms of grief no one's entered. Memories you buried so deep you're not sure they ever happened, or if you just dreamed them with your eyes open. And for a long time, you survive by silence. You hold it all together because if one word slips, the dam might break. And if the dam breaks, what happens to the little bit of control you have left? Jewel knew that silence. She lived inside it. Grew up in a world where pain was passed down like furniture and expression was a luxury no one could afford. But something inside her, something soft, almost broken, refused to die quietly. So she began to write, to sing, not to perform, but to live, to breathe. The songs weren't polished. They weren't made for stages. They were letters to herself, scrawled truths that said, I see you, I believe you. You're still here. Art didn't make the pain disappear. It just gave it somewhere to go. That's the difference. You don't create because you want attention. You create because you can't hold it all anymore. Because the alternative is numbness, and numbness is a slow death. Creation, no matter how raw, becomes a form of rebellion, against shame, against invisibility, against the quiet erasure that happens when no one, not even you, knows what you're carrying. And that's why this isn't about becoming a singer or a writer or a painter. This is about becoming real. This is about refusing to vanish inside your own life.
When Jewel sang, she wasn't trying to impress the world. She was trying to make sense of it. She was stitching her brokenness into something that could hold shape, even if only for 3 minutes. And in doing that, she found herself. That's what expression does. It gives your pain a voice. It turns your inner chaos into form. And once it has form, it no longer controls you. You can touch it, name it, breathe with it. So if you're holding something you've never said out loud, start. Write it, whisper it, draw it, let it spill, ugly and unfiltered, into whatever form it needs. Not to be admired, not to be liked, but to be seen by you, because you don't always create to be understood. Sometimes you create so you don't disappear. There's a moment, after the noise fades, after the applause dies down, where you're finally alone with yourself. No cameras, no stage, just breath and silence. It's in that moment that you realize speed was never the goal. It was a distraction. Jewel understood this before most. She had what the world told her was everything: fame, success, validation. But she chose something far more radical. She slowed down. She stepped back. She walked away from the rush not because she couldn't keep up, but because she no longer wanted to. She saw that constant motion doesn't mean you're going somewhere that matters. Sometimes it just means you're running from what hurts. In a world addicted to velocity, to hustle, to urgency, to the illusion of progress, slowing down is an act of rebellion. It's choosing presence over pressure, depth over display, and that takes more strength than chasing the next high ever will. Slowness isn't laziness. It's clarity. It's knowing what actually matters and being willing to wait for it. It's sitting with your child instead of your schedule. It's living one quiet, honest day instead of 10 blurred, forgettable ones. It's having the courage to say, I will not lose myself in the name of achievement. And that kind of wisdom, the kind that whispers instead of screams, it doesn't come easy. You earn it by burning out, by breaking, by realizing that more is not always better. You earn it by choosing to feel, even when feeling slows you down. You earn it by learning that your worth is not measured in momentum. So if you feel behind, maybe you're exactly where you need to be. Maybe the pause you're afraid of is actually the beginning of peace. Maybe slowing down isn't falling off track. Maybe it's finally walking your own. Perfection is a mask you were handed before you could even speak. Be good. Be quiet. Be beautiful. Be better. And somewhere along the way, you started believing that to be loved, you had to be flawless. But what if that's the lie that's been breaking you? Jewel never sang to be perfect. Her voice cracked. Her lyrics stumbled through the dark. Her truth wasn't clean. It bled. But it reached people not because it was polished, but because it was real. Because it gave permission. Permission to fall apart. Permission to speak from the fracture. Permission to be enough without needing to impress. She didn't arrive as a brand. She arrived as a person, unfinished, unfiltered. And in doing so, she became something rare, a mirror that didn't distort what reflected. Perfection disconnects. It isolates. When you wear it too long, you forget how to breathe. You forget how to speak honestly. You start living a version of yourself that's acceptable to everyone except you. But being human was never about being pristine. It was about being honest. And honesty, real honesty, is messy. It's raw. It shakes your voice and softens your spine. It means saying things you're afraid to hear out loud. It means looking at yourself without performance, without denial, and still choosing to stay. You weren't meant to be flawless. You were meant to be felt. And that happens not in your highlight reel, but in your breaking point, in your ugly cry, in the moment you stopped pretending you had it all together, and finally said, this is who I am. That's where your life begins. Not in perfection, but in truth. Not when the world approves of you, but when you no longer need it to. Jewel's greatest power wasn't her talent. It was her willingness to be seen just as she was. That's what made her unforgettable. Not because she performed well, but because she lived loud, cracks, flaws, and all. So maybe it's time to drop the mask. Maybe the version of you you've been hiding is the one the world actually needs. Maybe you don't need to be better, just braver. Braver to show up imperfect and real. That's not weakness. That's the beginning of freedom.